Good afternoon. Wow, there's so many other things you could be doing today. You know, you could be out for a nice walk in the sun. It's such a gorgeous time of the year to be alive in Florida, isn't it? But we're just really happy that you spent at least a few hours or an hour and a half or whatever length of time we'll be here today, that you could be here for this really important seminar. And we're delighted that Dr. LaTour is with us today. He has a personal interest in this message because it has impacted him personally. So what he's bringing you is not just his own sort of out-of-the-book ideas, but his own personal journey, which has, and he'll go into the details on that. Dr. LaTour he's currently working in Michigan as a dermatologist who specializes in removing cancers using the method. I've had that surgery myself. I was going to ask you how it looked. The doctor did a job. Thank you. You didn't notice it, right? Yeah, you go. That's always exciting. You can't notice it. But he's and he's a long-time connection to one of our church members here, and it's Dr. Roy Cheng. And they became friends in doing an experiment on basically exercise and the impact of exercise on physiology and rats and swimming rats and all things. I don't know all the details. You may talk a little bit more about swimming rats. But at any rate, they became best friends and have been very close for many, many years in doing research. Both went to Loma Linda Medical School, and through an 8-year-long MD and PhD program there, Roy and his family stayed in warmer climates while Donn's wife went somewhere that would make their blood thicker. Where do you think that was? Alaska. There you go. No, actually, just Michigan. Just Michigan, but that's okay. And he's lifelong vegetarian. Well, vegetarian, he would be the healthy on the planet. But there were some about unhealthy vegetarian. So we're looking at that because some of the folks here are vegetarian and they want to know how to do better. He's going to share some of his own personal and some current research about heart disease, and we'll take time to answer questions well. So we're happy you're here today. Curious to know, how did you find out about the seminar? Did you a flyer on the wall? I've been out here. You might have gone out to a church. Some of the Adventists are interest in health. We emphasize in whole food plant-based since the 60s, long before popular. It's getting a lot more popular today. And you see it in the newspaper? Any people read about it in the newspaper? Anyone see it in heard on the radio? And 88.3. Micro 83 is also WGTT 91.5. Some people heard it on there. So that's good. So we the word is getting out. So we want to take a lot of time in this introduction, but I just wanted to say, if you fill out your registration form, we have a book we want to give away, and this is a book from Joanne Rocker, and it's a whole food plant-based cooking book, and it's very, very good, tasty recipes, simple recipes. She's also from Michigan. And so we have 3 of them to give away. So we're going to draw for those a little bit later. If you didn't fill out your registration, I can guarantee you won't be getting a book. Did you want a registration? Okay, so I'll go and grab them and just get your, if you put your hand up after, we'll make sure you get one before too long. Well, let's begin today, because all health, really the foundation of all good health is God. God is the source of all goodness, and He provided in this creation everything necessary for us to have good health. And sometimes we just need to get some little direction into how to do it and how to do it better. So that's what we're looking forward to having today. So let us just ask the Lord's blessing on this time and upon Dr. LaTour. Thank you, dear Heavenly Father, that you love us. In fact, your word says, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospers. You want us to be healthy. You want us to be happy. You want us to enjoy this life. With all of its problems and challenges, you want us to be healthy so that we can get through the challenges and the difficulties with much ease. You don't want us to be sick. You want us to be well. And so thank you, Lord. We pray a special blessing upon Dr. LaTour and his family, and thank you that he's here today, taking time on his vacation to address this important topic. So bless and guide him, we pray, and all those of us that will be listening, give us attentive ears, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Dr. LaTour. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for the invitation to come and share for a few minutes with you this afternoon. First, let me start off with a little disclaimer. I'm not a nutritionist. I guess you would say I don't have any formalized training in nutrition or actually even cardiology. You know, I went through medical school, so we get a little bit of that in some of our practical training. But I'm really a skin doctor, so if anyone needs a skin examination, I'll be in the back in the dark room over there afterwards. So I'm pretty good at finding skin cancers. That's really kind of what my expertise is. But this is an issue that, you know, health is something I've been interested in somewhat my whole life. I was actually raised as a vegetarian. How many of you here were raised as vegetarians? I'm just curious. In this whole group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's maybe 6 or 7, which that would be a much higher percentage than probably just in a general group even anywhere. If you had a group of 100, you're not going to have probably even usually one person out of 100 who says they were raised a vegetarian. But I was raised a vegetarian. In fact, just to give you a little story, I've had meat that I know of just probably could count on one hand. When I was, one time when I was about 3 years old, my brother's 5 years older than me, I went to dinner that night and announced that I had had a vegetarian hot dog next door at our neighbor's house. Well, our neighbors were not vegetarians, so it was highly unlikely it was a vegetarian hot dog. And my brother was so distraught with that, thinking that I had that meat hot dog in my stomach, he could not eat supper that night and had to leave the table. So I grew up as a vegetarian, but we ate eggs, we ate cheese. I love ice cream. I love ice cream. I love chocolate, you know, all those things. I guess in some ways you could say I was an unhealthy vegetarian, and that's a little bit of kind of why I guess I'm maybe up here a little bit speaking. About 2 years ago, it was interesting. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I had some tightness in my chest. I've never had that. And I exercise. I walk an hour a night, maybe 4 or 5 nights a week on a treadmill fairly fast, you know. So it wasn't that I wasn't not doing any exercise. I woke up and I've had this thought, oh, that couldn't be my heart, you know. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, I kind of exercise. I'm a dermatologist, I'm not up all night long delivering babies, you know. So I get some sleep, and so I think I'm just going to get my heart checked. And actually, Pyro over here, my friend Roy Chang, he's a radiologist. Some of you here may know him. And so I called him and said, what can I do? And I looked around at some different tests and thought I'm going to get there's something called a cardiac CT scan. Have any of you heard of that or had that by any chance? So they use the CT machine and they make slices, pictures of your heart. And it's pretty accurate, actually. In fact, it's better than the angiogram, you know, where they put the dye inside of you and inject it. And so I went and had this scan, and it turned out that I had about a 30% blockage in one of my arteries in my heart. And I was just floored. I couldn't believe it. And I did some thinking about that and did some reading. And it's not a super significant amount. You think, well, 30% blockage. Well, it turns out in talking to some friends of mine who are cardiologists that the majority of heart attacks are from these 30% or less heart blockages. It's not the 98% ones. Because a lot of these people, as it gets get a lot of blockage, they'll start having symptoms and they go in there and find it and they know something's happening, but a large percentage of them are actually smaller, and that got my attention, you know, because that's the amount of blockage that I have, that 30%. So it made me doing some more research and things like that, and that kind of brings us to where we are a little bit here today. So we're going to talk just a little bit about heart health, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that are out there. And you know, heart is an ongoing research in the United States. Some areas in dermatology that I cover, not that much money is thrown into it, but in heart research, a lot of money is thrown into it. Is this advanced things here? Just so I know, blue, is that good? If I push a button here, it's good. There it is. All right. And some of you probably are kind of aware of a number of the things that we're going to cover. In fact, this may be very basic for some of you if you're into this at all. But heart disease is the #1 cause of death for both men and women in the United States. Not in every country in the world, but in the United States. And these are statistics from about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Over 600,000 people, 1 in 4, die of heart disease. If I ask in here, how many of you have someone in your family who has died of a heart attack? How many people would raise their hands? Well, almost half of the people here in the room. Coronary heart disease is the most common type of heart disease, killing about 370,000 people annually. And there's about 735,000 heart attacks annually, with 500,000 plus of them being a first heart attack. Now, my grandfather had a heart attack back in 1968, and when he had his heart attack, he was in the hospital for about a week before he died. I don't know all the details of it because we don't have any of the medical records, but I suspect that if he was alive now, he probably would have lived for a long time after that. They may have been able to do a heart stent or some of those things, but for many years, there was really not much that could happen. So a lot of people who have first heart attacks have a second chance, I guess you would say, right? Because not everybody dies from that first heart attack. Whenever your cholesterol gets too high, a sensor will send out a signal that automatically locks the kitchen door and turns on your treadmill. This is what the doctors would like to have happen when you go and see them. The Bible says something about the heart too. It's kind of interesting. Probably a number of you have seen this before. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A merry heart does good like what? A medicine. But a broken spirit dries what? So a broken spirit causes what? Osteoporosis, right. Whereas if you have a merry heart, maybe you don't need the medicine, or maybe less, or could potentially even avoid it. So I just wanted to spend just a minute here just showing you a little bit about, and some of you may know, what is this coronary heart disease? What is it exactly? So if you look here, there's a normal artery, and arteries are kind of like a garden hose, you know, that go through around the heart and feed the heart essentially with blood to keep the heart muscle healthy. And inside of that, there's these red blood cells that go through. With coronary artery disease, you see this kind of white area here, you get what's called a plaque buildup. Have you guys heard of that before? Does anyone know what's inside of that plaque buildup? Cholesterol. Okay. So cholesterol is kind of a yellowish colored fatty substance. Does anyone know at what age did we think that this disease process starts to begin? When you're in your 50s? 20s? Childhood now we're finding. It's incredible. You know, we used to think this was just an old person's disease, but it actually turns out that they're detecting now in childhood changes inside people's arteries. So what happens is this coronary artery, this builds up here, and the body is pretty smart. So it kind of builds a film over it to kind of protect the rest of your body from that. And what will happen is this will build up and get thicker and thicker, and we don't know exactly what will cause it to happen, but it will rupture. And so then you have a chunk of cholesterol that kind of sticks up, like they kind of are trying to show this on a three-dimensional thing on a two-dimensional picture. It sticks up there, and all these red blood cells are whizzing by, and platelets, and they'll hit that and they'll stick to it, some of the platelets. And does anyone know what platelets are used for in our blood? Why do we need platelets in our blood? It causes clotting of the blood. Does anyone want their heart artery to clot? No. So, but that's what happens. So you get this clot, and if it plugs up all the way, then the blood can't get through, and then the heart muscle will die, where that part of the artery is supplying the heart muscle. So it seems like kind of a simple thing, but it's actually, there's a lot of complex things that go into this whole process. So what are the reasons for the coronary artery disease? I'm going to go through just a couple of them. One of them is genetics. Who determines our genetics? Our parents. Do we have any choice over our genetics? Pretty minimal. Only in the movies, right? Where you go back in time and pick a new mom or dad, but not in real life. So we're not going to talk much about genetics. Does genetics play a role in heart disease? There's no question it does. But we can't do a lot about that. But what can we do something about? And I've listed here some of what are considered to be really the major lifestyle factors in heart disease. And we're going to talk mostly about diet today. But I did want to mention these other things because they're very important and have been shown a lot to affect things. How much exercise do you think is needed to be able to start having some effect on whether you have heart disease or not? An hour a day, do you think you need to do? How about 30 minutes a day? How about 5 minutes a day? There's actually some studies that show 5 minutes a day vigorous exercise is enough, it looks like, to have some effect on heart disease. How many people of you here have 5 minutes a day maybe you could spend doing something? Of course, that maybe is not the optimum. Some of the optimum studies suggest 1 hour a day, 6 or 7 days a week. But it does appear that even these smaller amounts, you can get very close to that, what 1 hour does for you. So it's very interesting. So it doesn't take a lot of moving. What about stress? How many of you have stress in your life? Okay, all right. So stress actually has a lot of effects. And this is a hard thing for people to study because it does appear that there's good stress. I mean, you know, when your wife is asking you, please get ready so you can go to the Christmas dinner that you've been promising you would go to, that's a little bit of stress on us, right? But that's not all bad stress. But then there's bad stress, you know, someone who goes through a divorce, for instance, or you have a loved one who dies. These are stresses that are they're measurable in our lives, but they're not necessarily good, but we have to deal with them. And that does appear to have an effect on heart disease. Does anyone know the mechanism how we think stress might have an effect on your heart? Does anybody know? Inflammation. That's what the current thinking is. And probably a lot of you, and the few times I've done these talks, of the people who come to these usually are the ones who probably could educate me, because you guys have an interest in these topics, right? So you're reading, you're seeing what comes up in the news, and probably you've caught that idea that inflammation seems to be something that's kind of new. When I say new, when I went to medical school 20 plus years ago, I don't think we talked about inflammation really, did we, Roy? It was almost nothing, but now there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that inflammation plays a role potentially in heart disease. But even as of yesterday, I just Googled, and they haven't conclusively said this causes heart disease. But there's just becoming, I'd say, a mountain of evidence that indirectly shows that inflammation plays an effect. And a lot of these things actually have an effect on inflammation. So we're not going to talk a lot about that today, but stress causes inflammation. Sleep, another thing. Very interesting things on sleep. If you get less than 6 hours of sleep, your heart disease risk goes quite a bit higher, actually. Smoking. Smoking just is kind of bad for a lot of things, right? We don't need to talk a lot about smoking. There's a lot of effects on that. I think you are all aware of that. There's a number of disease states that have a lot of effect on smoking, on heart disease. Probably the number one is diabetes. Is anybody here diabetic by any chance? Yeah. So I think you probably know the people who struggle with diabetes. There's two types of diabetes. There's an inherited form, and then there's one that's more of a lifestyle form of diabetes. Those who inherit it get it oftentimes in their childhood or teens, and their body doesn't produce insulin, and they have to have insulin essentially for replacement forever. The more lifestyle-related one is something that you could potentially do something about. Sometimes you're able, with some of the things we're talking about today, some people who have done this have actually implemented some of these dietary changes, have been able to even get off of insulin. Can't promise that that would happen, but almost for sure, if you implement some of these things we're going to talk about, the amount of insulin or your medicine you need to will at least decrease significantly. All right. So we're going to talk just a few about now, hone in a little bit more about the diet risks for heart disease. And we're going to talk a little bit here about cholesterol and fat. So this is what a lot of you have heard a lot about. And we talked a little bit about the cholesterol and the fat. There's different types of fat, and not every fat is exactly the same as another fat. So of the saturated fats and the monounsaturated, which of these do you think would be the worst for heart disease? The saturated fats. Now, when we talk about saturated fats, what does it mean when you say the fat is saturated? Are you guys familiar? I didn't put a picture of this in a chemistry. Some of you may be chemistry majors. Anyone here a chemistry major? We have two chemistry majors here in the room. One in the back there too, biochemistry. If you take fat, it's just a long chain of carbon atoms. And the more hydrogens that you put on it, the more saturated it is. So the more hydrogens, the more saturated. All right? Now, when it comes to cholesterol, do you need to eat cholesterol from food sources, or can your body produce enough cholesterol to keep you alive, do you think? How many vote that their body can make enough on their own? It's true. So you could go the whole rest of your life without eating a single drop of cholesterol, and your body would make enough. In fact, it's interesting. There's a number of, I actually happen to believe in creation, but there's even, whether it's creationists or evolutionists, and people kind of study, how they think humans were set up. Kind of the overwhelming thought is that probably humans either, quote, evolved or were created to be what type? You think vegetarian or omnivores? Vegetarian, actually, they think, because of the fact we can produce our own cholesterol and all these other things. So it's interesting. There's a lot of things that are set up for us that kind of lend towards the plant-based diet, which is what we're really talking about a little bit here today. So can anything be done to reverse coronary heart disease? And the answer is yes, there's several things. And I've listed a couple of them here. Number one, surgery. How many of you have had a stent or had surgery? Do we have anyone here on their heart? We have quite a few, just in our small little group here, who've actually had surgery. Now, in America, if you have chest pain and you're brought into, I don't know what the local hospital is here, Leesburg Hospital, is that the biggest? Where would they do heart surgery around here? Okay, Waterman? So, and you go in there and you're having chest pain, and they rush you up and they do an angiogram and they see that your artery is clogged. They're going to immediately tell you, you got to go home and stop eating meat. Is that going to be what they're going to do? No, they probably everyone would get sued for malpractice around here if they did that. They would immediately say, we got to bring in the heart surgeon. It's going to be $150,000, and it's going to be pretty painful, and they're going to cut your chest open and crack it open, and they're going to stop your heart, and but they're going to put you back together, and then you can go home and keep doing the same things you've always been doing. And is that going to reverse the heart disease? No, but they can take care of that artery pretty good. I mean, you know, they can either remove it, take another vein out of your leg and put it in there, which is not clogged up. But what happens if you take that vein out of your leg and put it up here and you keep eating the same way? What happens to that vein? It can clog up too. Yeah, it's amazing. Another thing that can be done to reverse heart disease, medications. What medicines are there out there that kind of lower cholesterol? Is anybody on one of those in here? Has anyone heard of that? There's statins is the name of the kind of family of drugs that lowers cholesterol. I don't think anyone really still knows how these work, actually. I was just Googling this last week just to see if any new breakthroughs have come, but they're still saying they're not quite sure how statins work. You know, it lowers cholesterol level. They're not sure if maybe that indirectly affects inflammation or what, but they do seem to help to get rid of to lower the cholesterol and lower the heart attack risk. And the last one here is lifestyle changes. So there was a guy, and some of you have heard of him. Have you heard of Dean Ornish before? So it's interesting, you know, at the end of, when we went into this 21st century, you know, Life magazine came out with the 100 most influential people of the century as we went into the century. And Dean Ornish actually was listed as one of them. There were a number of people on the list, and I'd say he was one of the more unrecognizable names. But it was interesting to me that Life magazine kind of honored this guy. He's actually an internal medicine doctor at University of California, San Francisco. And what he did is he took people with severe heart disease and made them symptom-free without surgery. So it's just an incredible thing, because here we have our whole American medical industry is geared towards bring them in, cut it up or put the stent in and get it out quickly and send them home, versus no, we're going to actually do something that without doing surgery that could potentially cure them of their disease. So what are these general principles that he used that can lead to reversal of heart disease? And so this is his diet that he developed. And it's interesting because this is a diet that, as you look through this, is very similar to a diet that really, as a Seventh-day Adventist church, we've been essentially saying is an important diet that we should be following since for probably over 100 years now. So let's start out with the very top one here. Very low in fat and no cholesterol. Less than 10% of calories from fat, and little of that fat that you do eat being saturated. And in his diet, he excluded food that was high in saturated fat, including some things that we may think are not that unhealthy. And I'll get back to that in just a minute here. Very high in fiber, and on his diet, he excluded all added fat and animal products, and he allowed them on their diet to have a little bit of non-fat milk and yogurt. And there's a couple reasons I'll get into why he did that. But starting off with very low in fat and no cholesterol, how much meat do you think you're going to be able to eat if you're going to have a very low-fat diet and no cholesterol? 0. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit, as we talk about these in just a little bit more detail. The group of people he took were all people who had had multiple stents, multiple times, had surgery multiple times, and almost every one of the patients he took into his study had been told, we have nothing more we can do for you. These are people that were sitting down and having chest pain as they were sitting, or they would take 3 steps and be in agonizing chest pain. So these essentially were people who were, we would say, walking time bombs, because they're just not going to live long, these people. And every single person, not like a 40% success rate or 90%, he had a 100% success rate. If a person followed this diet, they did not die of a heart attack. And their chest pain almost always was gone within just a few weeks, all right? I personally have one friend who, he was a vegetarian actually, and he had chest pain almost daily. I don't know if it was almost daily that he was having chest pain. But he was, I'd say, an unhealthy vegetarian. He was eating a fairly high diet in fat and that, and as soon as he went on this diet, within a week his chest pain went away. So it doesn't take months and months and months to start having some changes. So what do you think the average American diet is what percent of fat is in the average American diet today? What do you guess? It's 50%. So if you eat 2,000 calories, which not a lot of Americans only eat 2,000 calories a day, but if you ate 2,000 calories, 1,000 of them would be fat, all right? Now, excluding food high in saturated fat, including avocado, nuts, and seeds. Does this mean we're saying you can't eat avocado, nuts, and seeds? No. Remember, the people that he had in his diet already had disease. So if you do something before you have disease, you don't have to be quite so severe, right? But when you're in a life and death situation and you got to do something drastic, that's why he essentially had to eliminate some of these things. And high in fibers. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here's another thing, and I'm just going to go through. These are things on his diet. I'm not saying this is 100% the optimal, but this was at least shown to completely reverse heart disease. He allowed egg whites, which is a source of protein. The yellow part of the egg is what has the cholesterol in it, okay? Excluded caffeine, any other stimulants, including chocolate and MSG. He allowed, this is, I'd say, not because he liked it, but because so many of his patients were, I'd say, heavy drinkers. The majority of his patients actually stopped drinking any alcohol because a lot of this stuff is tied in with our mental health. You know that? Our diet is tied in with our mental health. If you don't feel good, people tend to drink more because they're depressed. And so a lot of the people in his study, when they started feeling so much better, they actually stopped drinking. Alcohol is interesting. Did any of you see that study a number of years ago that said if you drink 1 or 2 ounces of alcohol a day, your heart disease is going to be lower, you're going to live longer? Did any of you see that study? There have been a lot. Red wine was one of the ones, yeah. So there have been a lot, and I'm not an expert on all of this, but there's been a lot of, I'd say, pushback now against that study because of all the problems with alcohol, right? Cirrhosis of the liver, breast cancer, all the family problems. I think almost 80% of all motor vehicle accidents involve alcohol across the United States. One of the big things in that study was it turned out that the people who didn't drink alcohol in that study, a number of them already had severe liver disease or were recovering alcoholics. So that's why they didn't drink alcohol, meaning they were already kind of sick, so they died pretty quick after the study started. So that confounded the statistics. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah, so there were a lot of things in that. So moderate use of salt and sugar. And this is the very interesting thing. How many of you watch your calories when you're trying to lose weight? Yes, yes. But on this diet, no calorie restriction, because it turns out that if you're eating the right foods, you can pretty much eat as much of it as you want. And you guess what? You're still going to lose weight. It's an incredible thing, actually. All right, so here's the typical American diet. 50% fat, 35% carbohydrate, 25% proteins, and that much cholesterol every day. Here's the reversal diet. Only 10% fat, mostly polyunsaturated, which is going to be plant-based. 70 to 75% carbohydrate, 15 to 20% protein, and 5 milligrams of cholesterol per day. Now, one thing that's interesting, how many of you hear about this, that carbohydrates are bad for you if you listen to the news? How many kinds of carbohydrates are there? Does anybody know? There's 2 different distinct groups of carbohydrates. There's what? Simple sugars. Carbohydrate is another word for sugar. That's a fancy word for sugar. There's simple sugar, which is our white sugar that you can get by the teaspoon and that's in soda pop and all that. What's the other category of carbohydrates? Complex carbohydrates. There's just a total mountain of difference between those two. When you eat a teaspoon of simple sugar, what happens to it in your bloodstream? Immediately absorbed. If you graft it, the sugar level will go up like this. It lasts for a few minutes, and then it crashes when your body produces insulin to get rid of the sugar. Complex sugars, which would be, give me an example of complex sugars. Fruits, brown rice, you know, beans, for instance, has protein and complex sugars in it. When you eat that, the body, and you look at it, the sugar in the bloodstream, it goes like this. It slowly peaks after your meal, and it slowly goes down, and there's no crash that occurs like after simple sugar. So that's the big difference with the... So in making this comparison between a heart disease reversal and the normal American diet, plant-based foods have really become the primary source of your food and the primary complex carbohydrates. To prevent a heart attack, take 1 aspirin every day, take it out for a run, then take it to the gym, then take it for a bike ride. All right? So, just a couple interesting things about fat. Eating fat actually makes you fat. And I don't know if you are familiar, there's 3 ways that we get our 3 foods that we get our energy from. Sugar, fat, and what? Protein. So protein, fat, and sugar. So when you eat fat, or if you eat too many calories, what happens? How does our body store extra calories? In fat. So when you eat fat, it goes into your bloodstream, and it can go right into a fat cell and get parked there, and that's how it gets stored. It takes not that long. If you eat a complex sugar, does anyone know how it becomes fat inside your body? What has to happen to that sugar that you eat? Let's say you eat some fruit or brown rice, and that sugar gets into your bloodstream, and your body says, I don't need you right now, I'm going to store you for later. What has to happen to that sugar? Does anybody know? What? It has to get, we say metabolized, so it has to get broken apart, so your body has some enzymes in there that breaks apart the sugar. Guess what? Does it take energy when you break things apart? Yeah, so to break it apart, it uses up some of the energy, and then it has to be converted into fat, which burns up more calories, and then it can be stored into your fat cell. Does that make sense? So if you eat real fat and it goes into your bloodstream, it goes where? Right into a fat cell. If you eat a sugar, and the same with protein, to get stored into fat, what has to happen to it? It has to get broken apart, which uses energy. So it's much less efficient to eat those foods and to gain weight. Does that make sense? All right. So in all the studies here, eating too much fat gives you heart disease. And here's the other thing. So each gram of fat has 9 calories. Protein and sugar, only 4 calories. So you can eat how much more complex sugar than fat? Twice as much. You could be eating twice as much quantity-wise of fruits and vegetables and beans and that, all right? And some of you are probably aware of this. There's only one thing that's consistently shown to increase longevity in animal studies, and you know what that is? Just less calories overall. So the less calories, and if you really want to make your rat live a long time, almost starve him to death. How many of you have a pet rat? So we think it happens in humans, right? We can't, it's hard to correlate sometimes animal studies with humans, but we think that probably there's some correlation with that. So plant-based foods consist of primarily complex carbohydrates, which tend to be what? Very filling. How many big bowls of beans can any of you go there and eat at a time? It kind of fills you up, doesn't it? All right. Let's talk just for a minute about sugar, and its correlation with heart disease. It's not sugar is not real strongly correlated with heart disease, but oftentimes when we eat sugar, how many of us eat straight white sugar? Not much. What do we usually eat that sugar with? Fat, ice cream, chocolate, which is milk and sugar. And so there may be some actual direct correlation with sugar and heart disease, but it's hard to pull it out because it's usually we're eating so many other bad things with it. Complex carbohydrates are hard for your body to convert, which we just talked about a little bit. So there's actually been some studies on this. This is a PhD at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland who's studied complex carbohydrates a lot. And it turns out that even if you eat a lot of it and overeat with them, it looks like almost none of it actually gets ever converted into fat. Very interesting, huh? Complex energy, here again, this concept is they take more energy to convert into fat that can be stored. Dr. Donn at Stanford recently showed the type of food that you eat is much more important than the amount that you eat. The percent of body fat in the study that people directly related to the proportion of their daily calories that came from fat, it did not correlate actually with total calories. In much of America, we're obsessed with counting our calories. What's much more important is the type of calories that you're eating, much more important than counting calories. And so look, the very last thing here, it did not correlate with the size or number of meals consumed is really different than what most of us are thinking. They did a Harvard Medical School study of 141 women, had the same conclusion. There's virtually no correlation between calorie intake and body weight. Even after adjusting for age, physical activity, alcohol, smoking, the degree of excess weight was almost entirely correlated with their fat consumption. And here again, most diets in America are arranged around decreasing calorie consumption. And this is a lady who did a study that was very interesting. She had animals that had gained weight and then forced them, put them on a low-calorie diet, so they lost weight, and they lost it pretty quick. Then she kind of let them eat again as much as they wanted, and guess what happens when you eat again how much you want? What happens to your weight? It goes back up, so the animals gain their weight back really fast, actually. And then she tried to put them on a diet again, restrict their calories. And it took twice as long the second time to lose weight. Do you know why that might happen? What happens to our bodies if we... Yeah, our body wants to maintain kind of a normal. And so when we're playing around with it, if we go on a crash diet where we starve ourselves and lose a couple pounds, our body thinks we're in a starvation mode. And so we don't even understand all the complex interaction, but it kind of wants to maintain that equilibrium. And anyway, this is just proving that essentially. So it took a third the less time to gain the weight back and just much harder to lose it. So if you deprive yourself of calories, what happens to your metabolic rate? It goes down because your body thinks it's starving. And a slower metabolic rate makes it harder to lose weight. Actually, on this reversal diet or a plant-based diet, you can eat as much as you want, as many times a day as you want, and guess what happens to your weight? It still goes down. When I went onto this diet, and I was eating maybe 6 times a day, and I lost 30, 40 pounds just very quickly. So eating as much as I want, as many times as I wanted. So protein, just a very few seconds, a minute on protein. Too much protein can actually be harmful, a number of studies have shown. Does anyone know how protein is handled in our body? It gets broken down, but it has to go through our kidneys, and our kidneys can be damaged. There's a number of studies now that show, especially that high-protein, animal protein diets can have bad effects on the kidney. And it also appears that it causes osteoporosis if you're eating too much protein. In animals, a low-fat diet high in protein promotes actually the formation of coronary artery disease. There are some diets out there that advocate doing what? High-protein diets, high animal protein diets. And you actually can lose weight on these diets. So there have been a number of studies showing that you can lose weight. However, the problem with these is that they do seem to have a bad effect on your coronary artery disease. So you can lose weight, but your heart arteries are going to maybe potentially suffer with that. Cholesterol, we talked just a bit about this. When you consume, two sources of it. You can consume it, but also your body can make it. In any way, and most 3/4 of the cholesterol in our bloodstream is typically made by our bodies. If you eat saturated fat, that goes directly into producing more cholesterol. So you want to avoid foods that are high in saturated fat. The more cholesterol you eat, the higher your risk of heart disease in almost every study that's been looked at. Dr. Shakel at University of Texas showed that dietary cholesterol was associated with increased risk of death from coronary artery disease. Likewise, the less cholesterol you eat, the lower your risk of heart disease. And we didn't get into this a lot, but there's different types of cholesterol, isn't there? And probably most of you know that. You heard the HDL and LDL. Which is considered the good cholesterol? The HDL. So the more you exercise, the more your HDL goes up. But it turns out the interesting thing is when you go on a very strict plant-based diet, your cholesterol goes up or down, do you think? It goes down for most people overall. In fact, there is a magic number of cholesterol. Have you heard of the Framingham study? Framingham, sorry, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Framingham. A long-term study in Boston, outside of Boston. I think it's been going on for 20 plus years now, 20 or 30 years. But in their study, and they have tens of thousands of patients, and this also Dr. Ornish's patients, I think, would say the same thing. If you have a cholesterol under 150, I think they've had 0 patients die of heart disease. So there is actually kind of, you want to just ignore everything I'm saying and just keep your cholesterol under 150, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape, actually. And this is just giving some of the cholesterol numbers, which in America, we consider what number to be normal? Under what? 200. That's kind of the number that your primary doctor is probably aiming to get you under. But really, you want to be under 150. That's the number that you want to be under. But here's just some of the mortality. If you're at over 245, your number, you have a 242% higher chance of having heart disease. So cholesterol is, so cholesterol in the right amount is necessary. If you don't eat any cholesterol, your body will make it for you. Excess cholesterol we don't think is good, and this gives an average of how much you need, how much fat you need. The average person needs 14 grams of fat to kind of meet the minimum amount to make the cholesterol that you need. And this is just for interest's sake, just to give you the different types of saturated and monounsaturated. So, sorry, this is the saturated column here. So coconut oil, olive oil is pretty low, and so is canola oil. Coconut oil is unfortunately fairly high in saturated fat. In fact, it's even higher than butter is. And so, in general, if you're going to use oil and have a little bit, you would want to use which oil? Canola or possibly olive oil, okay? Those are the lower. What's that? Grapeseed. Grapeseed, okay. I don't know the numbers on that. That's a pretty low too, is it? That one? Okay. So our challenge is to convince the public that heart attacks are sexy. So this is the fast food industry. You can't eat a lot of fast food, can you, in America, if you're going to avoid some of these things that we're talking about. So, well, anyway, that gives you just a little overview of some of the things that I learned. And we have one person in the back there. Blue, would you come up here just for a second? I just met Blue here just for the first time today, he's had, I'd say, kind of an amazing experience, actually. So I wanted him to just talk just for a minute here as we end our program and take before we take a few questions. So Blue, just tell him a little bit about what happened to you about a year ago.
About a year ago, on February 27th, I ended up in a hospital With the DVT blood clot.
Okay. And so what did they say was the problem there, Blue? What did they recommend for you?
Well, changing my diet, first of all.
What would happen if you didn't change your diet, did they say?
I was going to die.
Okay, so it was pretty critical.
That was it.
So what was your kind of typical diet in a day before this all happened?
Fast food, KFC, Denny's, Waffle House.
All right.
Every day.
Every day, okay.
Every day.
That sounds kind of typical, actually. Yeah.
I actually enjoyed it for a while.
All right, so tell them the changes that you made. What are the changes that you made, and what's kind of a typical diet now for you?
Typical diet now is, thanks to God's help and my pastors here and everything else and support. I got a pressure cooker and everything else, and I was able to go ahead and get a crock pot and all the fruits and vegetables I want. Eat them, I mix them up. Pressure cooker, garbanzo beans, navy beans. I love beans. Put them in there, mix them up with a whole bunch of other stuff, and that's really what I do every day.
Okay.
Low sodium diet of 500 milligrams, no more than that. Off dairy, no meat, no nothing.
Okay.
Real strict.
Okay. And how many times a day would you eat, or how much would you eat? Do you limit how much you eat, or you eat as much as you want?
Actually, I get filled up with a half a bowl.
Okay. And how many times a day would you be eating now?
Maybe 3, 4, maybe.
Okay.
Depends on my day.
All right.
On average.
Does the food taste good to you?
It took some time. I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie.
All right.
Took some time. I missed my wings for a while. I'm not gonna lie.
So guess what? There is a re-education process. But
Yes.
can you learn to like some of these things though?
I love it now.
Okay, so that's good to hear, right?
I
So
can't
you
go
actually can. So now tell me a little bit about. What's been the change in the 1 year time? Would you say, from then and now?
The biggest change is the change in my taste palette.
Okay.
And also the smell of foods.
Okay.
And now if I go by a Burger King or McDonald's or anything else, all I smell now is fat.
Yeah, and this is very interesting. Similar experience with me and a number of the people in Dr. Ornish's study. That I love fatty and greasy things, fried foods. But I think I would almost get sick now if I ate some of that. So you think, boy, this could never change. I could never change that. But guess what? It can happen.
Yes.
What about with some of your issues, medical things? What happened, for instance, like with weight? Tell them an idea of what happened with your weight.
As of Monday, my weight is officially, I've down to 296. I dropped 129 pounds.
Wow, that's good. Yeah. So, it's an incredible thing what God has actually, the type of life that he would like for us to experience.
Yes.
He's anxious for each of us actually to have good health. I believe that firmly. And health and happiness and everything kind of go together.
Yes.
So, hey, thanks, Blue, for sharing a little bit with us. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll take any questions if there are any. Yes. Okay. All right. And I may not be able to answer your question, but I'll try. I'll tell you if I don't know the answer. So.
Well, these are very simple.
Okay.
I know nothing about it.
Wait, sorry. There's one right here.
Okay. Go ahead.
I heard that farm fresh eggs, especially the ones that are fed healthy, have lecithin in them, which combats the fat and cholesterol. And also, saturated fat, I heard that was healthy for you if you take a tablespoon a day. Now, what would you say about those two things?
So, about the eggs, there do appear to be some differences in eggs. So, if you're going to eat eggs, and if you're going to do it, I would recommend you get vegetarian-fed chicken eggs that are free-range eggs, and I would not eat the yolk of it if you're going to eat it. Because if you're going to eat the egg, the yolk is what has all the cholesterol in it. So, now that may be the part that you like. I don't know. But you can re-educate yourself, I think, to like the other part of the egg. Now, the part about the tablespoon of fat, so a tablespoon of fat has about 14 grams of fat. That's about how much Dean Ornish recommends for a whole day If you're trying to reverse. Now, I will tell you this. There's two different, and I didn't get into this much. There's a reverse diet and there's a prevent diet. So if you have disease and you're in a crisis state and you got to reverse heart disease, it's much stricter, the diet, than if you're in, I just want to try to live healthy and prevent getting disease. So if you're in a prevent disease situation, you can eat significantly more fat in a day and still be healthy. So anyway.
One of my questions that I have is, my doctor says, take a baby aspirin. I don't like to take anything. And it's, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of people tell me, well, because your blood is thick. Now, how do I know if my blood is thick or my blood is thin? How is an aspirin going to help?
Well, you know, it's interesting. So when I was in medical school back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, that kind of came out, that recommendation to start taking an aspirin. But if you Google it right now, I think the standard recommendation in general for the whole population is not to take an aspirin, actually, because there have been some studies that have shown that it actually increases heart attacks. Now, there are diseases, blood clots, some people have stents in their heart. There's other things that where I think the risk becomes different and it's maybe healthier to take one. So I don't know what your individual medical condition is, but I think, now I'm not a cardiologist, but my understanding is the current recommendations now are not for everyone to take an aspirin. 20 years ago, I told all my patients to take an aspirin when I was doing my internal medicine rotations.
Well, I feel no different now. I took the aspirin for 30 days.
Okay.
And I went back to the doctor. She said, did you take them? I says, for the 30 days that you gave them to me. But I feel no different before, no different after. Mm-hmm. Then she says, well, we want to do a stress test. And I told her, why do I want to do a stress test that something's going to cause me to have a heart attack? So I declined on the stress test.
Uh-huh.
Is that a smart move or a stupid move? I mean,
Well, I think in general, and I don't know if you're having symptoms. If there's symptoms, stress tests are recommended. I'm not aware of them doing them as a prevention. Is anyone in the primary care field? You're asking some complicated questions, but in general, my understanding is typically stress tests are ordered if there's like some symptoms, like you're having chest pain or maybe some blood pressure irregularities or there's probably a whole list of reasons why they would do it. And I don't know what symptoms you had. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't comment on your aspirin. The aspirin you wouldn't really feel, it's a very low dose, what they have you take, and you wouldn't normally feel a difference. Are you aware of anything, Pyro, with stress tests, other than if there's no symptoms? I don't think there's a recommendation to do a stress test in general, is there?
Insurance would not pay if you don't have any symptom.
Yes.
To start off.
Yeah.
But you can pay yourself.
Yeah.
And anybody will be happy to do that for you, I'm sure, around here.
Well,
But the bottom line is stress test is to look for reversible ischemia. They do is a two-part test. They look for reversible ischemia, meaning you have some blockage that is not fixed, that can still be treated, and that's all they're looking for. So if you have symptom, then yes. If you don't have symptom, I would not recommend doing it.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, the doctor says when she puts a little stethoscope, she's not getting something she wants to hear, or something is wrong. And
well, that's a different.
I tell her it's
yeah.
white coat syndrome.
Yeah. See, I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
getting the whole story of what she's seen. It could be that it is indicated. I don't know based on your symptoms that she saw.
Well, what are the symptoms of a heart attack?
Tightness, any discomfort coming up and down your arm. Some people feel nausea or upset stomach almost, and that's what makes it so difficult sometimes to tell the difference.
Women's symptoms of a heart disease is going to be different from a man, very different from a man. Sometimes it could be back pain, sometimes it could feel like abdominal symptoms. So you really, women especially need to get checked. And it could be that the aspirin was recommended because of something else to prevent heart disease or stroke or something else. So it's not necessarily because you had cardiac symptoms that they're recommending it. Like if you have high blood pressure, they might want to start it just to prevent a stroke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of your one of your slides said that for the reversal, you should eliminate avocado, nuts, and seeds.
Yeah.
And those 3 items are usually part of a plant-based diet.
Yeah. So I was trying to stress that I would say there's a reversal diet and then there's a prevention diet. So if you're just trying to live a long time and you never had heart disease, I think it's okay to eat those in moderation. But if you've already been diagnosed with heart disease and you have blockage already in your heart, if you want to reverse that blockage, then you have to get extreme. Does that make sense? So there's really 2 different diets. I didn't talk about the prevent. What I showed you was the extreme reverse, where they were able to show that people who had blockage of their heart it started to open up again. You follow what I'm saying? So if you're just trying to live a long life and be healthy, a plant-based diet where you can eat those in moderation, that's no problem. Yeah.
Correct me if I misunderstood you. Did you say that coconut oil has cholesterol?
Coconut oil, unfortunately, is fairly saturated as a fat. So it's one that, and I'm not an expert in coconut oil. So
in my opinion,
yes,
there is nothing you can use better than coconut oil. And nothing has cholesterol unless it's coming from an animal product.
It does not have cholesterol. So if you have, unfortunately, saturated fats are shown to turn into cholesterol. So if you're overeating too much in the saturated fat, even though there's no cholesterol in it, it could raise your cholesterol level.
But that's something God made.
What's that?
Something that God made, something natural and healthy.
Well,
I disagree with you on that.
That's fine, yeah. Here's the only thing I would say is, if you go out there, I don't think that God created coconut oil. He created coconuts, but humans process dramatically many coconuts to make coconut oil. So
it's been proven good for Alzheimer's, for memory, for health, overall health. It's been proven to be really good.
I'll tell you, it's a lot better than eating beef fat, I can tell you that. I would put it up there over that.
Getting back to your statement about inflammation, what are your thoughts on omega-3, omega-6 fish oils to help with inflammation?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was just actually this last week reviewing some studies, and I don't remember now if it was the Mayo or the Harvard Clinic site, but too much of that can, it looks like, maybe drive increased cholesterol also. So you can get those same essential, we didn't get a lot into, there's essential fatty acids and things that are needed, and but those can also be found in plant-based sources. So, the fish oil is probably the most common one that's out there, but you can find those same supplements from a plant-based source also. And that's what I would recommend. I don't think they cost really that much more. They're a little more difficult to find because the fish oil ones are so common out there, but I would go with the plant-based of that supplement, yeah.
What are your thoughts on red yeast rice, that supplement?
On the which one?
Red yeast rice.
I don't know much about that. Sorry. Anybody here know? Did you hear that question? Yeah.
I just found out by reading that high fructose corn syrup can elevate your blood pressure. And I happen to have a problem with leg cramps, so I drink club soda for the quinine. And I have crazy fluctuating blood pressures, whereas my diet doesn't vary, or my weight doesn't vary, and so forth. How much would you have to have before I can blame it on that? I'm driving my doctor. I'm driving my doctor crazy.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an answer. I don't know that I have an answer to that. Your question though about high fructose. I mean, a lot of those syrups are in so many things now, right? I mean, from sodas to a lot of the cookies and baked goods and things have a lot of that in it. And I think it's being recognized to be a little bit of a health crisis issue because of it's so inexpensive that these liquids, you know, in America you can buy a processed cookie or something cheaper than you can buy a banana almost. You know, it's so inexpensive. So it's a problem. I think a lot of cities have even started trying to put taxes on sodas and things like that to try to prevent obesity. But I don't think it's healthy. I don't know directly the correlation between that and blood pressure, but it certainly seems to be having an effect on weight for people, and then indirectly would affect blood pressure, of course. So,
let me chime in on that. You're taking quinine for your restless leg? Right, leg cramps. About probably 10 years now, FDA have came out with a warning that do not prescribe quinine for that. So that's why you cannot take it. And a lot of doctors are still doing that by telling, go and take some club soda or whatever. And it's such a minuscule amount of quinine in there that you're really not getting a lot of quinine to help you. So I'm not really sure if that's really helping you or not, but if the high fructose in those soda are causing you a problem, I would not take that anymore, will be my advice.
I want to go back to fats, and I understand from what this lady said over here that any fat that is liquid at room temperature, of which coconut oil is liquid at room temperature, is okay. Now, compare that to butter, for instance. Butter is not liquid at room temperature. And that's why so many people and authorities say that coconut oil is fine because even though it's highly saturated, at room temperature, it's liquid. And I say to my wife, when it's wintertime and it's cold, you know, you always know what the temperature is outside because look at the coconut oil, and if it's solid, you know it's cold. But if it's when it warms up, the coconut oil in our jar goes liquid.
So I'm sorry, did you have a question or you're just making a comment?
Well, I was just, what do you think about that?
About
the fact that I've been led to understand that any fat that is liquid at room temperature is fine. But if it's not, such as butter, then you should stay away from it. Or margarine, for that matter.
Well, I don't know the exact melting temperature when it changes, from solid to liquid, and it varies a little bit from each fat. But I would look still more at the hydrogenation level in the saturated versus unsaturated nature. That, I think, is more important than the temperature. I think it might roughly correlate with that, but I don't know the numbers exactly. I think that's much more important. You're looking for something simple, though, to use, right? That's what you're kind of getting at. So I don't know if anyone knows the melting point of those. Does anyone know the solid to liquid temperature? What's that?
76 degrees. That's what.
Hi, Diane. How you doing? Okay. The high melting point one, okay. So if you live in Michigan, that's a dangerous rule of thumb to use.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Dr. LaTour? No, we'd like to thank you, Dr. LaTour, for coming all the way from Michigan to give us this informative
Well, thank you.
talk. And Pastor, we have the... Okay, does everyone who filled up the form for the 3 books giveaway, if you want to turn it in so we can put it in there to get it all... You want a form. Okay, I will make sure you have a form. Anybody else have that you want to turn in? We need a form. We need some blank form. One more blank form, please.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Why don't we just have a word of prayer as we close today? Our Heavenly Father, we're just thankful for this opportunity to meet and to speak a little bit and to really look at the diet that you gave to us back in the Garden of Eden. Be with each person's here. There's different struggles that each one of us have. It could be over diet, over many other things. And we're thankful that you're there to provide assistance to us. And we're thankful that we can look to you as a God of love and someone who wants and has our best interests at heart. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.